Good morning and welcome to Daybreak Australia. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney and we're counting down to Asia's major market opens.
Good evening from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. I'm Shery Ahn.
The top stories this hour. Wall Street falls again as relief bill optimism is tempered by fears a new virus variant may trigger fresh lockdowns and travel curbs. UK trade links with Europe are resuming after France agreed to end a ban on cross-channel traffic. The EU is said to see a possible Brexit deal before Christmas. And the US expects China's purchase of agricultural goods this year to be the biggest on record. However, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says more is still needed.
And here's a picture on Wall Street. The S&P 500 fluctuated between gains and losses throughout the session before finishing lower. Energy communication services led the declines. We did get the Nasdaq Composite and the Russell 2000 diverging, setting record highs. The dollar strengthening for a third consecutive session. We also saw oil prices pressure the lowest in a week. We had some disappointing consumer confidence data, not to mention existing home sales numbers as well. Let's see how things are shaping up for Asian markets. Here's Sophie Kamarudin. Soph.
Shery, going to the Asia session after global stocks capped a three-day decline, we could be looking at a mixed bag early in Asia. Kiwi stocks extending Tuesday's gains, and we do have a dollar to contend with. That recovery mode for the greenback and lower oil prices has been weighing on commodity currencies. So the Aussie dollar holding a two-day loss, but ASX futures nudging higher. This after a three-day drop for the ASX 200. And today we are watching to see if Sydney will extend a lockdown there. And over in Japan, we're keeping an eye on whether there may be a revision to legislation to provide COVID compensation for businesses that do comply with virus restrictions. On Tuesday, we saw Japanese stocks fall the most in a month, while volatility on the Nikkei jumped the most since August. Nikkei futures in Chicago settling lower, while the yen is holding steady at around 103.64 this morning, Paul.
All right, thanks very much. As drug makers scramble to ramp up vaccine distribution, a new variant of the coronavirus threatens to complicate immunization efforts. The CDC says it's highly likely the new strain reported in the UK could already be in the United States. Let's get the latest from our healthcare reporter, Robert Langreth. Robert, what are you hearing?
So the authorities in England are reporting a new strain. There's about 17 new mutations, and they think it might be more transmissible than some of the other strains. So it's not doesn't make you any sicker, it's just maybe more transmissible. Now, this is circumstantial evidence. It's not proven yet, but it's been around for a few months now, a couple months since the fall in England and around London, where it spread heavily. So, I think the CDC is probably right. And some people with it probably already have traveled to the U.S. So there'd be a high likelihood there are cases of it in the U.S. or in continental Europe. So it's not really clear to me how well these various travel restrictions are going to work at this point, because the virus is all over the place.
In the meantime, we continue to see high-profile officials receiving the new vaccines, Dr. Fauci being one of the latest ones. How's the vaccine rollout unfolding here in the U.S.?
It's continuing to proceed. What's happening this week is now that the Moderna vaccine is being approved, 5.9 million doses of that are starting to be distributed and rolled out. So the supply is increasing of that vaccine, and now we have two, and more people will be able to get vaccinated. So that's proceeding. There's still obviously a great shortage of vaccines, and so for now, the campaigns are restricted to healthcare workers and residents and workers at nursing homes, and then it will eventually, in early next year, expand to people 74 years and older, and then to frontline essential workers, people like grocery store employees or people that are emergency responders.
Robert, we were hearing from President-elect Joe Biden a little earlier today. He was warning that case numbers in the US are going to get worse before they get better because this vaccine rollout is going to take some time. So what are the challenges remaining around the rollout or the encouragement of getting people to wear masks and other protective equipment?
I think the big challenges are patience and pandemic fatigue. This has been around for a while. Everyone's hearing about these highly effective vaccines, but the fact is that in the U.S., case numbers are really high, deaths are really high, hospitalizations are all-time highs, and people, for the next few months through this winter, need to continue to be very careful and to take precautions and not just act like this thing is over, because it's not by any means. and it's going to be a while before we get enough people vaccinated that it starts, making a big difference in the spread.
Bloomberg healthcare reporter Robert Langreth there with the latest on the coronavirus pandemic. We have breaking news out of Israel. The government has fallen as that budget deadline has expired. The Israeli government coalition, of course, in power only for about 7 months. They failed to pass the budget and the deadline has expired. That's triggering a new election in an already election-fatigued country, sending them to a fourth vote in 2 years as after Parliament failed to approve a national budget for the second year in a row, and polls now suggesting that the campaign could feature a new challenger who might be able to dethrone Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been a long-serving leader for Israel as the government falls and the budget deadline expires. Let's now get over to Karina Mitchell with the first word headlines. Karina.
Shery, thank you. France is reopening trade links with the UK 2 days after a temporary suspension in traffic closed Dover and other channel ports. Paris says travel from the UK to the continent will resume for EU citizens and residents able to provide negative COVID tests. Other nationals will be allowed to make only essential trips, and the EU says unnecessary personal travel should be avoided until further notice. Meanwhile, the U.S. says it expects China's purchase of agricultural goods this year to be the biggest on record. Beijing has raised orders for soybeans as domestic pig herds recover faster than expected from African swine fever, spurring a global price rally. Corn, also used in hog feed, has seen a similar surge. However, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross told us both Beijing and Washington agree more is needed.
There is work to be done, and we knew that. Remember, this was not announced as a complete trade deal. This was announced as a phase 1. So we and the Chinese both are well aware that there's much more to do, and hopefully that will happen in the coming period.
And the official cost of the postponed Tokyo Olympics has jumped by more than 20% to $15.4 billion. That's up almost $3 billion from last year's estimate. The rise blamed on the 12-month delay caused by the virus. However, government audits show the real cost may be significantly higher than officially reported at more than $25 billion. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Karina Mitchell. This is Bloomberg. Paul, back to you.
Still to come, the challenge of vaccinating the world against COVID-19 from a medical management perspective. We'll ask Medic's global CEO Sigal Atzmon how the pandemic has shaken up global healthcare. But up next, Joanne Feeney from Advisors Capital Management is here with her outlook for 2021, including why smart cyclicals are likely to outperform. This is Bloomberg.
U.S. stocks fell for a third day as relief bill optimism was tempered by a reported new variant of the virus and fears of new lockdowns and travel restrictions to contain it. Let's bring in Joanne Feeney, partner and portfolio manager at Advisors Capital Management. Joanne, always great having you with us. How much is what we're seeing this week in markets to do with just holiday trading season, seasonality really, to do with investors closing out positions, as opposed to, say, fundamental issues with the market?
Yeah, Shery, there's certainly some of that going on. End of year, cleaning up portfolios, a little bit of rearranging. But mostly, I think what's happening is so much of the good news of the vaccine had been already digested. And even the stimulus bill, I think people largely anticipated towards the end of last week that was going to work out. And so some of the flattening of the market, I think, just reflects how much has already been built into the market from those two good sources of news.
But as you said, all of those sources of news seem to be done at this point. When we go into the new year, what could revive? What is out there that could potentially revive animal spirits?
Well, really getting back to normal life. And so, yes, it will take a while for the vaccine to reach widespread distribution. But the fact that more and more people will be vaccinated, we'll start to see more of the expectations that movie theaters reopen, that theme parks reopen, people go back to restaurants, and that'll start happening slowly. But as you know, investors are forward looking. They're going to start looking to the second half of 2021 as they rebuild their portfolios and rearrange things in the first half. And so, that I think will cause some of the ones that have been most beaten up, some of the stocks that have been most beaten up, to start coming back early in the year.
If you're looking ahead for the next big catalyst for markets, either to the upside or the downside, is it the Georgia Senate race and the future of fiscal stimulus, or is there something else you're looking to?
I think the Georgia Senate race certainly is important. I think the probabilities right now are that the Republicans maintain control of the Senate. And what's important about that is that then they maintain control of the agenda of the Senate. But should it go the other way, you'll get a mixed response. Some people will immediately be concerned about taxes going up and more aggressive government spending following. That's, again, a lower probability possibility. I think the real catalyst for next year will be the pace of the vaccines distribution and good news about additional vaccines, right? Because right now we're looking at the US and Western Europe really being the first to have access to that. But broader, for the global recovery, we need that vaccine to be globally available. So I think good news will come in the form of additional vaccines getting approved, and that'll raise people's expectations for the global recovery, which should help stocks here in the US as well.
Yeah, well, in the US, we saw the return of some familiar themes, tech performing well, the US dollar performing well. I know the last time we had you on the show, you favored tech picks like Broadcom, Qualcomm, IBM. Are they still among your picks, or have you added to that list?
Well, they're still among the picks. And, one of the things that has continued throughout this crisis is these secular growth stories. We're seeing the rollout of 5G, those prior picks, Broadcom, Qualcomm. But another big area that's gained a lot of attention lately is cybersecurity, but also fintech, smaller companies like Encino or Stone Company out of Brazil, PayPal, the big one here in the US. Those, I believe, will continue to outperform in 2021 as the pace of economic recovery picks up, as more activity really feeds the demand for those transactions. So I think that secular story of fintech growing in importance, I think, is going to be a good one that's going to continue for a couple of more years at least.
When it comes to some of those big names, especially those companies that operate in different countries, how much will the strength of the dollar be a hindrance? As this GTV chart on the Bloomberg shows, we have seen that pop with the Bloomberg Dollar Index.
Yeah, it certainly will affect the translation, right, of those stock prices and any dividends that companies outside the U.S. pay. But for a lot of these software companies, their fixed costs in local currency are relatively low. And so it's not that much of a headwind for them. So it's not something that we're overly concerned about in terms of the strength of the dollar.
What about the strength of domestic demand? Perhaps not necessarily for those big companies, but what about the small caps? Of course, we do have the Russell 2000 today reaching a new high. And we, at the same time, saw some disappointing data when it comes to consumer confidence.
Yeah, the data is really mixed. And what we're seeing partly with the small caps is a bit of a rotation. Investors taking advantage of the fact that they've really underperformed. And so there's a bit of catch up going on. Because a lot of small cap companies do tend to be more vulnerable to, as you put it, Shery, domestic demand being weak. But now that there is this line of sight to the vaccine coming out, investors are expecting demand picks up and helps a lot of these smaller companies. And so, I think we're going to see further rotation into small cap names, but also into value names. Those smart cyclicals that Paul mentioned earlier, I think really stand to do well in 2021.
All right, Advisors Capital Management Partner Joanne Feeney, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Even with more stimulus on the way, businesses could be in for more pain. And that's the view of Avenue Capital Group CEO Mark Lazary, who spoke to Bloomberg about capital markets and the game plan for his NBA team, the Milwaukee Bucks.
You're seeing that there are problems in a number of places, but there's also growth. So for us, really what we're finding is opportunities where we can invest in situations where people need capital. And we're providing that capital, but we're doing it at a pretty steep price.
When you clear a balance sheet out, you are now clearing within the reality of a Fed at the zero bound. Has the Fed distorted your part of the hedge fund world?
It actually has. What's ended up happening is it's made it easier for companies to borrow money. So anybody who could borrow is doing so. But then what it's done is the reverse. If you can't borrow, then you've got to deal with folks like me. And if you're doing that, we're able to charge 12, 15%. So it's kind of odd. a zero rate environment, yet we're still charging 12 to 15.
I love that you say, otherwise you've got to deal with me, and you don't want to deal with me. Mark, I do wonder, when you look at distressed investing going forward, how much of this is simply who knows bankruptcy law best? And I ask this of you, knowing that you did clerk for a bankruptcy judge in the Southern District of New York. So is that really what this game has become?
I think you've got to understand bankruptcy law, because what ends up happening now is you're going to have a number of restructurings. But I would tell you the most important part today is really understanding the balance sheet of a company. That if we're going to lend, are we, super secured? Are we senior? Where are we in the capital structure? Because things can change on a dime, and you want to make sure that you're covered. So I would tell you the capital structure is going to be a little bit more important, but you better have that legal background.
Well, embedded in this is the assumption that perhaps, or my presumption, that recoveries are not going to be as robust this time around, given how much debt has been incurred and given some of the erosion with some of the covenant light loans that we have seen. How much lower will recoveries be, and how much fiercer will the battle be over who gets what?
Oh, I think recoveries will definitely be lower, and I think the fights are going to be absolutely insane, because everybody's going to be fighting over a smaller pie. So that's why the focus is really where are you in the capital structure. But you're going to have lower recoveries. It's hard for you not to, mainly because of what you said, which is that people have taken on more debt, and there's less equity value there.
Mark, I want to talk about market drawdown, Sharpe ratios, and the ability to make 2 and 20, but that's going to have to pass. I've got a horde of people that want to know if you can bring the glory of Elsinger and Oscar Robertson and the Milwaukee Bucks back. What is the plan forward after signing this gentleman for $1 gajillion million? What is the Bucks plan into 2021 in the NBA bubble?
The plan is simple. It's to try to win a championship. The execution of that plan is going to be kind of hard. Look, we're going to do everything we can, and I think we've got probably, our big three, which is, I think, second to none, at least in the East. So I think we'll have a pretty good shot. I think everybody's pretty excited. I think the hard part was really re-signing Giannis, and the fact that we were able to do that is actually great for Milwaukee. It's great for small market teams, but more important, it's great for our team.
Avenue Capital Group CEO Mark Lasry speaking to our colleagues Tom Keene and Lisa Abramowitz. Still to come, the final push for a post-Brexit deal. EU and UK officials see a possible accord before Christmas. We have the very latest. This is Bloomberg. Britain and the European Union are giving negotiations over a post-Brexit trade deal what they call a final push, with Chief EU negotiator Michel Barnier saying that they may seal a deal as soon as Wednesday. It comes as France gets set to reopen transport links with the UK 2 days after a temporary suspension amid virus concerns. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg opinion columnist Therese Raphael from London. And Therese, really the sight of all of those trucks lining up just across the border, showing how disruptive Brexit could be.
Yes, absolutely. There were thousands of trucks that were not able to transit across the border. There are normally 10,000 trucks a day going between Dover and Calais, and the government had set in place Brexit plans in case of disruption that they had to trigger early. So for many, that was just an early indication of what it might look like in January if the two sides are not able to reach a deal. However, for a lot of Brexiters, they see it as a sign that the costs of no deal can sort of be blamed on virus disruption, and it allows them to just sort of justify leaving without a deal. But as you said in your intro, the talks do seem to be progressing. We're now expecting some kind of announcement, possibly as early as Wednesday, though we've been saying that for a few weeks now.
Indeed, never let a good crisis go to waste, as the saying goes. But Britain has a tiered system of lockdown restrictions. Is there a sense that they might have to be tightened now and possibly for quite some time?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the announcement Saturday that triggered these travel restrictions in over 40 countries was that a new variant of the coronavirus had been so prevalent in the south of the country in London that they were putting those areas into a new tier 4. Now it appears that the variant may be already spreading to other parts of the country. So I would not be surprised if we saw parts of the country that are in tier 3 move into the higher tier of restrictions. And yes, that most likely means that this is going to continue certainly into January, but possibly, a few months longer. The vaccine rollout is underway. They've had about 500,000 doses delivered so far, but that's a long way from inoculating, say, a third of the population to really cover the most vulnerable. So, we could be looking at schools not starting in January or certainly not starting on time. And a lot depends on whether they can roll out rapid testing in schools and in places where, all sort of traffic and commerce has stopped right now. So, I mean, it's been a pretty grim run up to the Christmas season all around.
How far ahead is the UK when it comes to the vaccine rollout, though?
Well, the UK obviously was the first country to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and that gave it a bit of a head start, but it had only ordered 40 million doses, and most of those are only coming next year. So there's a limit on how many can be vaccinated. It seems to be going pretty well, but it would need to be much accelerated if they're going to vaccinate as many as they want to by Easter. For example, I plugged my details into a sort of vaccine kind of planner, and it says I'm around 25 million in the queue to get the vaccine, and at the current rate, I probably wouldn't get it until, about a year's time. So they really do need to accelerate things, but, the government is pretty confident it can do that. I think a lot will depend on, whether they also get a Brexit deal through and they have that sort of pressure taken off. Otherwise, January is going to, be another sobering month on both fronts.
Therese, very quickly, the past few days in Britain have been characterised by a number of policy U-turns on virus control. Who is leading policy in Britain at the moment? Just quickly.
Well, I think, Boris Johnson will say that he's leading it, but it depends really on who you ask. Some say that he's listening too much to his backbenchers. Some say too much to pollsters. So I think, that's something he's really going to have to address in the new year if he doesn't want to lose some of the voters that he gained a year ago when he won that election with such a majority.
All right, Therese Raphael, Bloomberg opinion columnist in London. Still to come, we hear from the CEO of medical management solutions provider Medix Global. We'll talk about the intricacies of rolling out a vaccine and how a new variant could complicate those efforts. This is Bloomberg.
You're watching Daybreak Australia. I'm Karina Mitchell with the First Word headlines to our top story. Reports from Brussels suggest EU negotiators feel a Brexit accord may be possible before Christmas, although the latest UK offer on fishing rights has been rejected. Boris Johnson now says the value of fish EU boats catch in British waters could be dropped by 30%. That is significantly less than the 60% Johnson was demanding. However, the EU will agree only a 25% reduction, saying even that would be hard to digest. Meanwhile, the Japanese government is maintaining its gloomy view of the economy, saying conditions remain severe despite some signs of improvement amid the virus pandemic. The Cabinet Office describes the overall picture in the same grim terms as last month, while noting an uptick for exports and corporate earnings. The latest report also lowers the government's assessment for private consumption. Staying on Japan, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been questioned by prosecutors looking into allegations that political funds were improperly used during his time in office. Kyodo News says Abe submitted voluntarily to questioning. Prosecutors are seeking to build a case against his state-paid LDP secretary for not recording income and expenditure related to entertainment for potential voters. And reports from Beijing say market regulators have ordered the country's tech leaders to tighten oversight of e-commerce purchasing in the latest move to rein in the increasingly powerful internet sector. 6 of China's largest tech businesses were summoned for talks, including Alibaba and Tencent, with the regulator saying it will increase monitoring of their so-called group buying model. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Karina Mitchell. This is Bloomberg. Shery.
BioNTech says its vaccine will likely be effective against the reported new COVID variant. Chief Commercial Officer Sean Merritt says they also don't anticipate any shipping challenges in the UK, despite recent travel curbs.
We don't anticipate shipping challenges. We ship by plane, boat, and lorry. If the Channel Tunnel to the UK is shut, there are other routes into the United Kingdom.
And what about operating conditions, or let's say transport conditions, right? So it needs to be stored at negative 70 degrees Celsius. Is that making it a little bit tricky because you have to develop the rollout infrastructure, the rollout logistics to be able to leverage?
No, don't forget that together with Pfizer, we've designed the shipping boxes to act as -70 freezers. So we simply put the vaccine doses and the vials, which are contained in the vials, into these shipper boxes, which have dry ice in them, to keep them at -70. We pack them and we ship them. So no, we don't see any issues there at all.
What are some of the other factors, Sean, that would have an influence on your decision to either keep capacity targets where they are or increase them?
Well, I think that there's 7 billion people worldwide that we would want to vaccinate with our vaccine. So any ability to increase the capacity would help to achieve that aim. We've always said that this is a global pandemic, and for those who want access to our vaccine, we will give them access through purchase agreements, and that still remains the aim. So I think that we're very focused on that, and if we can increase capacity to do that quicker, then that's what we will do.
Sean, just a closing question on these different variants of the coronavirus. So is it correct to say that your design of the vaccine has an ability to be calibrated to different strains, different variants of this coronavirus?
That's exactly right. And that's one of the enormous attractions of using mRNA. The ability to make a new vaccine extraordinarily quickly is one of the significant advantages. This is one of the things we started with Pfizer with flu 18 months ago. And of course, now we can apply that to COVID virus too. And it's the speed with which you can change your vaccine that makes mRNA particularly useful in a pandemic situation where you are seeing changes to the virus. As I say, the virus so far, the variants we've seen so far, have not affected the efficacy of the vaccine.
And that's BioNTech Chief Commercial Officer there, Sean Merritt. Let's get some more on the new COVID-19 strain that's reported to be spreading rapidly in the UK and is feared to have already made its way to the US, Germany, France and Switzerland. Joining us now is Siegel Atzman, the CEO and founder of Medix Global, a global provider of medical management solutions. So Siegel, there is a new strain or a new variant. The consensus seems to be, as we were just hearing, that the vaccine will remain effective against it. Does it change in any way the plan and the timeline for a global rollout?
So the rollout is going to work, whatever it is. Everyone is planning, working really hard on the operational side and starting to give the vaccination out to as many people as possible, starting with the elderly ones, the healthcare, frontline workers, etc. I can't say for sure, and we don't have full proof that those new strains will be fine under the vaccine. We hope that we do not need, and that the world will not need to have a new vaccine, and that Pfizer will not have to re-engineer the vaccine and start another rollout. So we need to have more information. We're looking out for it. I do feel that the world is trying to calm down everyone and say everything is going to be fine. We have to continue, but we need more information about this strain. As it looks now, it seems that it's going to be okay. There is no certainty. So we need to continue to roll out, and it's working. There are going to be areas where it's going to be more challenging and areas where it's going to be very organized and disciplined. It depends which area in the world you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in terms of the logistics around the rollout, what are some of the key milestones that need to be hit in the rest of 2020 and in the first half of 2021?
So first of all, you have to look at different countries. If you look, for example, at Hong Kong and Singapore, the biggest challenge is that there is no social system that has clinics that are affiliated with affiliations between GPs and patients, like in Europe, in the UK, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, etc., where every person has a GP clinic that's been following their families and their children and their parents for many, many years. They know each other and they trust that doctor, and they will go and be able to be vaccinated through the system that they already know. And in a lot of other countries, like in Asia, for example, you have very disciplined people. The organization around the sick people is unbelievable. You see very good results in Singapore and in Hong Kong in dealing with the COVID-19 situation. However, I believe that the vaccination and the rollout is going to be more difficult because you don't have those infrastructures of relationships with GPs, with doctors, and it's going to be more complicated. I do believe that Europe, although we have the Brexit on one side and this travel ban into the UK, for the vaccine and for the purpose of getting people vaccinated, the whole world is going to collaborate, and we will see those transportations and the operational side working well, because no one in France or in Belgium wants the UK not to be vaccinated. So we're going to see operational solutions, deals, and we believe that this is going to be rolled out as soon as possible and faster as the countries get used of rolling it out.
So you operate in over 90 countries, right? What are you hearing from the ground as we continue to try to put into effect this vaccination campaign, the largest in history ever? What are the biggest logistical challenges that you're seeing?
So I think that there was an underestimation of how many people would want to get vaccinated very quickly. There was a trust issue that was on a big topic for a long time. And suddenly when the vaccines got there, this instinct of people that actually want to go back to normal life and really want to get vaccinated got very, very strong. So you have a much bigger demand than what was expected. And younger people, healthy people are calling, reaching out to the NHS, trying to bypass lines. People really want to get vaccinated. So it's getting a lot of vaccines in, and the rollout has to be very fast. So getting clinics organized, and it has to be very structured. If I look at the UK, it wasn't very good in getting the COVID situation under control, not very disciplined. A lot of sick people stayed at home, were recommended to stay at home, weren't monitored too closely whether they were going out or not going out. Quarantines were not strictly monitored enough. So will the discipline kick in when we speak about rolling this out? Still and yet to be seen. But the people really want to get vaccinated. So there's going to be a big push and maybe some social unrest if it's not going to work very efficiently.
We've seen huge changes when it comes to the way that people go to hospitals or really liaise with the medical professionals, especially when it comes to the boom in digital services, right? What are you seeing unfold, especially as you operate in mainland China, different cities in mainland China?
So the unbelievable has happened. The most improbable situation has occurred with this pandemic, which has taken a terrible toll on the world from an economic and a human toll, obviously. However, there is a good legacy that I believe is going to come out, and we see already its foundations right now out of this pandemic, and that is virtual care. That is care on demand from the safety and the comfort of people's homes. So virtual care has grown tremendously. Different digital health applications now can monitor and engage with patients about their health care and help them prevent healthcare or treat themselves in certain situations and remotely speak and engage with their doctor and specialist. This is here to stay, and that is a revolution in how healthcare is consumed and provided. It's going to be more affordable, more accessible, and more sustainable. So people will get more healthcare at a better quality. On the other side, if you look what's happening, we will see more artificial intelligence coming in and more engagement and more analysis and personalized treatment through artificial intelligence and digital health capabilities. You mentioned China. China is really at the forefront, and with its commitment to serve and better serve the Chinese people and improve their healthcare infrastructure without building this very expensive and inefficient huge hospitals and clinics and infrastructures as we see them that are not sustainable in Europe and specifically in the US. They've turned and developed very strongly their digital capabilities and their artificial intelligence capabilities. So if you want to look who's going to win the game probably and who's going to be at the forefront, it's absolutely China. Will Chinese technology and capabilities go into the world? That's another question. You have the US who works really hard to make healthcare more accessible, more sustainable, more affordable through digital health and artificial intelligence. You see Europe waking up, but now struggling with this pandemic. So it's a race, but change is here. It's happened. It's good, and it's not going to go away. People and patients we see on the ground really like to use virtual care and got used to it.
Sigal Atzmon, great having you with us. Thank you. CEO of Medics Global joining us from Tel Aviv. Coming up next, Canada pushes back against China over a mining takeover. Details from Toronto ahead. This is Bloomberg. Time now for morning calls ahead of the Asia Trading Day with Sophie in Hong Kong. So the hunt for yield continues. What's on the radar?
Over at Principal Global, Shery, they say look to EM bonds for higher returns next year, given that you have debt levels that look meaningfully below DM peers and extremely easy financial conditions, making those levels manageable. So Principal recommending going overweight high yield debt and EM credit on expectations that spreads will compress more than IG corporate notes. But the key risks here, to their view, include an earlier than expected tightening cycle, dollar strength, tighter fiscal policy, and disappointing vaccine rollout, Paul.
Yeah, in terms of bonds, potential bargains being eyed among Chinese junk bonds. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, Paul, over the course of the year, when you look at that risk premium on dollar bonds by junk-rated Chinese property firms in particular, that has narrowed to about half what it was at the March peak, with recent defaults not rocking the boat as authorities seek to rein in that debt pile, which PIMCO says is a positive move and makes the sector more appealing. And going forward, portfolio manager Stephen Chang expecting policy checks to gradually put developers on a more sustainable track following this rapid debt buildup. So he's liking issuers with credible deleveraging plans and looking for firms with potential for rating upgrades, Paul.
All right, thanks, Sophie. Well, Canada has rejected a plan by China's Shandong Gold Mining to buy a gold miner that operates in the Canadian Arctic. TMAC Resources, which owns the Hope Bay mine in Nunavut, was told in October that it would face a national security review. Joining us now from Toronto is Bloomberg's Stephen Frank. So, Stephen, why was this deal rejected?
The government didn't say exactly, it never gives its reasons. In these security reviews, the precedent is that they don't say what the objections were. But there's certainly been a lot of a national debate here about this deal, fears about China establishing a bigger foothold in the Arctic. There was talk about China getting a greater access to the Northwest Passage, which climate change is making into an increasingly important waterway. And also the mine location is near a military facility. Of course, on the other hand, there was quite a few people who were saying that a rejection would only be made for political reasons, and security issues were overblown.
Given that we have seen plenty of political issues between the two recently, especially after the arrest of Huawei CFO, I must guess that this wasn't really a surprise.
That's for sure. The relationship has really soured since the arrest of Meng Wanzhou. There's been retaliation from China. There's been billions of dollars of Canadian imports were halted. And so I think it's fair to say that China-Canada relations haven't been this bad since the current Prime Minister's father, Justin Trudeau, first established diplomatic ties with China in the 1970s.
Right. Bloomberg Stephen Frank there joining us from Toronto. And as 2020 wraps up, China looks set to miss its U.S. trade target under the Phase 1 deal amid heightening tensions between the two economies. Still, U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross believes it will be a record year for agriculture purchases by Beijing. He spoke to Bloomberg about the work that needs to be done on U.S.-China ties.
The Chinese commitment, for example, to purchase agriculture is huge. And I believe it will turn out that this past year that's just ending will be the largest agricultural purchase year that China has ever had from the U.S. That's a very good thing because our farmers have been hurting. Remember, though, we have remained with tariffs on quite a lot of goods coming from China. And the major reason for that is to still have some trading room so that if we do get the kinds of concessions that are needed for the bigger issues, that we have something to give them potentially in exchange. So I think it was a very well-balanced use of tariffs, pulling off tariffs on some in a reciprocal way as they lowered their tariff and non-tariff trade barriers to us, but leaving some in reserve so that we can get the rest of the way. Because we must solve the technology problem, that we must solve the industrial espionage, we must solve the stealing of secrets in various ways, and we must solve their efforts to become the dominant military power at our expense.
And President Trump and you, I must say, have made that a priority, dealing with the industrial espionage, some of the theft of intellectual property, things like that. Can you measure that and see where we've actually made a difference, or has it not kicked in yet? I mean, is there less of it today than there was 4 years ago?
Well, they have passed some legislation that moves a little bit in the right direction, but big issues like market access still remain. So there is work to be done, and we knew that. Remember, this was not announced as a complete trade deal. This was announced as a Phase 1. So we and the Chinese both are well aware that there's much more to do, and hopefully that will happen in the coming periods.
Secretary, I don't want to let you go without asking you about one subject. It's not really directly in your responsibility, but you are a senior official in the U.S. government, and that's this cyber attack reportedly from Russia. And I understand there's an ongoing investigation. We don't know exactly what happened. But can you give us a sense from inside the government of the priority being given to this, of figuring out exactly what happened, who did it, and what we need to do about it? What is being done?
Well, there's a lot being done, but since it's a work in progress, I'm really not at liberty to discuss it. But I can assure you it is a very top priority of the intelligence community, of Homeland Security, of the affected departments, and of the president and the vice president themselves. This is a very serious situation. It's a very widespread hacking and a very sophisticated one.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. One last short question. You mentioned the NDAA, that Defense Authorization Act. Is there any question the president will sign it? Because he suggested once he might veto it.
Well, that is obviously up to him. As you know, it passed both houses with overwhelming bipartisan support. And so I would hope that he would consider looking at it favorably. But he's the president. There's only one president at a time, and it's his decision what to do.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross there. And here's a quick check of the latest business flash headlines. Elon Musk says Apple boss Tim Cook rejected a possible meeting 3 years ago to discuss buying then struggling Tesla. He tweeted that he reached out to Cook during the difficult Model 3 rollout, adding he would have sold Tesla to Apple for a tenth of its current value, about $60 billion. Tesla was burning cash in 2017, but Musk wrote that Cook declined to take a meeting. Vaccine makers Moderna and BioNTech fell heavily, which, combined with a smaller decline for Pfizer, erased a combined $10 billion of market value. BioNTech shares have been popular among retail traders, but are also some of the most volatile, with average daily price swings more than 3 times the broader index. The fall came amid fears the virus variant reported in the UK could already be in the US and Europe. The SEC says Ripple Labs and its top executives misled investors in the world's third largest cryptocurrency. They're alleged to have sold more than $1 billion of tokens without registering with the agency. Ripple co-founder Christian Larson and CEO Bradley Garlinghouse are said to have created an information vacuum that allowed them to sell XRP into a market that knew only what they chose to share.
All right, we're just a few minutes away from the open of markets here in Australia for Wednesday. Let's get over to Sophie Cameron in Hong Kong for a look at what to watch. Soph.
Paul, we're keeping an eye on AMP shares. This on local media saying that Ares management is unlikely to make a binding offer for the wealth group in the 6 billion Aussie dollar range. Now, the U.S.-based Ares launched its takeover bid for AMP back in October as part of its efforts to push into Asia. Now, Santos also on watch on a local report that the energy player is considering selling infrastructure assets over the next 12 to 14 months. Now, this is a move that was flagged by the CEO earlier this month. And Stockland in view as well after entering a capital partnership with an SPV that will focus on industrial and logistics assets. The portfolio value target for the SPV is for $1 billion. Now let's look forward to check in on what's going on with trading underway in New Zealand. Checking in on the NZX 50 this morning, we are seeing gains being extended for Wellington stocks up by about 0.7%. And Sydney futures, the ASX futures, they have managed to halt a 3-day drop. We may be looking at some upside for Aussie stocks in Sydney in just a few minutes' time. We are seeing the Aussie and Kiwi dollars staying steady, but CBA noting that there may be a near-term correction in both the Kiwi and the Aussie dollar. CBA noting that a move lower in iron ore prices will weigh on the Aussie. Shery.
Right, coming up in the next hour, the president and founder of Sri Kumar Global Strategies joins us with his market outlook, including his optimism on China and why you should get out of tech stocks. Plus, don't miss our exclusive chat with the CEO of the Indian low-cost carrier Indigo about how it's adapting to the virus fallout. The market open in Sydney is next. This is Bloomberg.